sex gas and being shanked to death. This is going to be a big one. So let's back up a bit. Back in 2006, the revival of Doctor Who took the country by storm. The BBC were expecting to build a large audience over the course of several series, akin to the absolute massive success that they had after just one episode. They anticipated a decent audience share with the marketing they produced for Rose, but then when it got those record high viewing figures, they threw everything they could at the show, believing it to have immense franchise potential, commissioning 2 further series and 2 Christmas specials before Series 1 had even finished. During this time, BBC Three and CBBC approached the production office about the potential of getting a piece of this action for their own channels through the use of spin-offs. The first of which came from CBBC, who pitched what was later described as essentially Harry Potter but on Gallifrey, which would have shown the Doctor growing up as a young child before becoming the Doctor that we knew and loved. But because they wanted a young David Tennant type rather than keeping him with the canon, and of course it would have downgraded the mystery of the character, Russell soon shut down this proposal, thankfully, and following the success of Sarah Jane's return to school reunion, soon greenlit the production of the Sarah Jane Adventures, which garnered huge praise in audiences almost immediately. Thank goodness he did this, however. Can you imagine how the character of the Doctor would have been affected if they had been changed like this? I mean, say what you want about the Timeless Children, it really isn't great. At the very least, it maintains grandiosity and doesn't reduce the Doctor to a childhood prankster. But in order to appeal both ways, Russell also began to put together a sci-fi crime drama he had been sitting on for several years called Excalibur, this time for BBC Three's use, but with the presence of another beloved Doctor Who character, this time Captain Jack, and he also renamed it to the brilliant name used for the distribution of Doctor Who to avoid leaks, Torchwood, an anagram of Doctor Who. The series was soon greenlit for a monumental 13 episodes post-Watershed, and marketing and news coverage meant that the entire nation were highly anticipating the return of Captain Jack. So with all of that in its favour, imagine that's the mindset you're going into Torchwood with. Just straight after the first episode finishes airing, you get episode 2, which has come to be favourably known in the Doctor Who fandom as the sex gas episode. What a way to make a bad impression. Often with a TV series, you need to properly hook people for more with your second episode, because if they like the first, then they are most likely to come back for the second to see if the rest of the series is worth sticking around for. But the series was too busy showing how mature and adult it is compared to Doctor Who, and actually forgot to stop appealing itself and start appealing the audience. But by that point the audience needed major persuasion to keep on watching. And thankfully BBC Three got some of its highest viewing figures with Torchwood, as audience was somehow swung in the right direction by the following episodes. But that does not make this episode any better. I mean, where do I begin? I think this episode is infamous for its failings on many different levels, the biggest of which I don't see mentioned enough, being that this was Chris Chibnall's first ever contribution to the Doctor Who universe. That was not a good sign for him taking over as showrunner, because when you look at Russell's first Doctor Who script, you've got a cheesy, camp alien invasion story with a lot of heart, and even Moffat's first Doctor Who story is an incredible story filled with horror, emotion and a fantastic concept behind it. But then you look at Chibnall's first Doctor Who script, which was, I say again, the sex gas episode. I can't stop saying it, the sex gas episode. It doesn't matter how good series 11 and 12 may have been, or how incredible most of his Torchwood scripts after this were, he is still the guy who wrote the sex gas episode. The thing that this episode seems to be trying to do is a commentary on how sex is represented in media, and how we've come to glamorise it for the sake of shock value. Okay, that's a decent starting point for a unique commentary. But then the episode gets a hard on and just seems to indulge in the very flaws in pop culture it's trying to critique. Take the scene where Gwen is in the cell with what's-her-face. The scene starts by trying to be a serious moment that furthers the story, but then like Gwen, it seems to enjoy the kissing way too much. We get about a minute of the characters watching and enjoying their Frenching before realising it is meant to be writing a story, not satisfy itself. Speaking of Chibnall again, how the hell did he think this was a good idea for an episode? His first 2 scripts for the show are fueled by horniness, and I don't know if I can blame him for that in Cyberwoman, but I can definitely blame him for this. Now, I'm not going to rant for ages about Chibnall's contribution to the series here, because I know he went on to refine his work and make some excellent stories both inside and outside of Torchwood. But when writing this, he was definitely still a young and immature writer who didn't know what to do with himself. Speaking of which, I mean, this is a bit of a sideline here, but I am confused as to why Russell approached Chibnall about running the show with him. Not that I don't think he did a good job later on. I mean, he wrote some excellent things, but it's not like he had any showrunning experience or even any Doctor Who experience outside of a clip complaining about the show in the 1980s. I'm not saying it's a bad thing that he hired him. I think he was a fairly good choice, but I'm just confused as to why he was picked, considering he was such a young and still establishing writer at that point. Anyway, it is what it is, and we are stuck with this episode for now. I think the idea of starting an episode with a meteor crash into Earth and the team having to investigate it is a good idea, and the way in which it is tied into the murders across Cardiff means you can have the police procedural and the sci-fi in a way the pilot failed to do. But then the way in which it does tie the episodes together, I really do not think works. Having Gwen literally drop a tool be the reason all of this started was a very stupid way to go, and it does not really give the alien or the episodes the stakes I think Chibnall was going for. Also, it further shows how unlikable the team is in the early episodes because of the way they treat Gwen. I like how Jack tells it was just a mistake and to get over it, because it shows him as a firm but kind boss in a place in the series where he seems to be quite grumpy most of the time. But then by the end of the episode he literally says it's just her fault and her mess to clean up, and leaves her to sort it out. And as for Owen and Tosh, I just don't like how passive aggressive they are, and it really makes trying to like them a tough job in all honesty. Oh, and while we're on the subject of characters, the dialogue in this episode is abysmal. The themes of the episode and the dialogue do not seem to coincide, as Jack is saying stuff like came and went, or just died through sex, that's how I want to go, completely undercutting the episode's intentions and Jack as a character. I mean, alongside my dodgy American accent there, I apologise for that. I mean, I could understand how he was mature in camp, but then a lot of Series 1 likes to write Jack as the moody, ambiguous type. I'm here for that, but you need to commit to it when it's needed in order to work. The story also tries to do series maintenance by setting up some themes and ideas for the rest of the episodes to explore, like the hand in the jar for instance. This is a fairly good idea, considering how Jack lets the girl go in order to keep it safe, and how it's the centrepiece of the display when you first walk in. I like how the episode doesn't tell you why Jack wanted the hand safe so badly. I know in retrospect we know it was the Doctor's hand, but unless you played really close attention at the end of Christmas Invasion, and were incredibly good at guessing during the original run, there is no way of knowing that it's the Doctor's hands. But then there was no point in having the hand be there if you weren't going to explain what it was in Torchwood. I know the show was picked up as a Doctor Who spin-off, but I can very much picture someone watching Torchwood without having seen Doctor Who and not getting everything they may want, such as a conclusion to the mystery of the hand, or any answers to the running arc of Jack's immortality. Meaning, I do not think that fanning about with the hand in this episode was worth it in the long run. In terms of endings, this episode has an appalling one. One of Chibnall's biggest flaws as a writer is that he is incapable of thinking of a good ending to his stories. Sometimes this isn't his fault, like in The Power of Three, but in Series 1 of Torchwood I think he is very much to blame, as he was the head writer and therefore in charge of keeping the scripts in check. Jack kissing the girl feels like a trope in all sci-fi, despite the fact the episode was trying to make a commentary on that, but whatever. The writer clearly does not care about that one, so why should I? And the kiss itself is extremely uncomfortable, especially as one-liner. I'm not sure how old the girl is meant to be, but the optics make it look very creepy, considering Jack is apparently well over 100 years old. The direction is not anything worth writing home about here either. I can't remember any shots in specific that I think stand out, nor did any of the camera work add to a scene to make it work. I don't think it is bad necessarily, I mean I'm no authority on direction, but then early Torchwood suffered from looking very cheap, so I can't really blame the director, or say he did a bad job. It's fine, it's functional. All in all, this is a terrible episode of early Torchwood. I know I said in my first review how I enjoyed these early episodes because of this charm and experimentation it was doing, but then I do think this episode is one of the weakest. That's not to say I get no enjoyment out of it. I can honestly say when I sat down with a cup of tea to rewatch this episode, I had a good time, even if for the wrong reasons. There are some moments which are so bad it's good, and at least it was trying something. I can imagine a worst writer just copying and pasting the pilot, or just copying a format from Russell's work, adding a limp concept on top. I can commend it for trying something new, and as far as the first series of Torchwood goes with its quality, I can genuinely say that there are episodes later on which I find to be considerably worse than this. But then I can't say that this episode is good, especially considering some of the moments which I feel have their intentions in the perverted and gross. Let's just hope that next week there is a good episode which learns from what this episode did wrong and builds upon what the series is doing right. What's next week's again? Ghost Machine. Well, it's better than Sex Gas. Oh, cool. Helen Rayner wrote this one. I really like her Doctor Who scripts. Hopefully a script editor did something good with Torchwood. Let's wait and see.